This video is made possible by the free-to-play action game Crossout. Check out the game through the link in the description below, and you can start with 3 extra weapons or a vehicle cabin just for registering. From Austria to Japan, from Eastern Turkey to Vietnam, these were the borders of the largest contiguous empire in human history. 9 million square miles, it stretched much more than double the size of the modern United States of America. Its rise began in 1206 and its fall finished in 1368. Just a blip compared to the historical longevity of such nations as the Chinese Empire that the Mongols caused so much turmoil. A continent doesn't experience that much change without many amazing things happening, for better or for worse. Generally for worse, though, as we're talking about the subjugation of millions of people under the force of arms. Not for nothing did the most celebrated Mongol leader Genghis Khan tell his enemies that he was the flail of God. So, let's take a tour of those 162 years, with 10 stops along the way, and stop number 10, changing the climate. It's hard to get reliable figures for how many people died across Asia and Europe as a result of the Mongols under Genghis Khan. This is because Genghis Khan is known for exaggerating how many people he killed. Still, there is general scholarly agreement that when the Mongols sacked a city, it was possible that they killed as many as 2 million people, as was the case with the sack of Baghdad in 1258, and that was one of very, very many. Consequently, the Mongols left so many corpses in their wake that they cut down the need for fires and cut down trees to such an extent across much of Asia that they functioned as a carbon offset. Not even the Black Death of the 1300s did that, and that cost more than 25 million lives. The study that reached this conclusion was conducted in 2011 as part of the Carnegie Institution department with Stanford University. They found that over the course of the Mongol invasions of the 1200s, 700 million tons of carbon was not released into the atmosphere. That would not have produced any obvious change, as that's about how much the world emits into the atmosphere through gasoline alone every single year, and it was spread out over decades. Populations also recovered before any of the old forests could have completely regrown, so the effect was not long-lasting. Still, given that Genghis Khan claimed he was the representative of the eternal blue sky, it seems that by changing the weather itself that, well, he sort of lived up to that name. Number 9. The family of creepy births. It was not unknown for later historians to write legends around the births and childhoods of momentous figures. For example, the story of Romulus and Remus being somehow raised by a wolf is well known. There's also the legend that the Temple of Artemis in ancient Greece burned down the day Alexander the Great was born, but the 1162 birth of Genghis Khan must be one of the grimmest stories. According to Mongolian accounts, his mother, Holin, told him that he was born holding a clot of blood in his hand, which was held up as a sign that he was destined to be a great conqueror. Less well publicized, but equally unnerving, is what Holin said about his brother Khazar when he was born. Supposedly, he had entered the world gnawing like a dog on his own afterbirth. It must be said that Holin was alleged to have said this after she learned that Genghis Khan and Khazar had both murdered their brother Begta with arrows, so the source has plenty of reason to speak ill of Khazar. Despite this, when Genghis Khan was going to put Khazar to death after he had risen to command of the Mongols, it was Holin who intervened to persuade Genghis Khan to not shed the blood of a second brother. Khan therefore gave Khazar a token command of about 1,400 troops, showing Mongols that apparently being born, mounting your own afterbirth, was not nearly so great an omen as holding a clot of blood. It's all a bit weird. Number 8. Near invasion of continental Europe. The countries that felt the full wrath of Mongol conquest included China, Russia, Korea, Khwarezmia, which is modern-day Iran. Austria nearly joined that list too, and with the loss of Vienna, much of Western Europe would have been vulnerable to conquest or at least devastating raids by Mongol hordes. The Mongols gave 2 very compelling examples of how they would manage against any armies the European nations could throw at them. On April 9, 1241, an army of 20,000 Mongols confronted an army of 30,000 at the Battle of Legnica in Poland under Duke Henry. The Mongols drew out Henry's cavalry with a feigned retreat, then through a heavy bombardment of rockets created a smokescreen that cut off contact between the European cavalry and infantry. When the cavalry was routed, they switched their bombardment to the European footmen with devastating effect until, well, they broke as well. It was said that the heavily outnumbered Mongols practically annihilated their foes, foes, and were able to cap off the victory by parading Duke Henry's head around, because of course they did. The very next day, 100,000 Europeans under King Bela IV faced 80,000 Mongols under Batu Khan and Subadai at Sajo River in Hungary. The Mongols were able to both frontally attack and come up from behind the European army in a pincer movement, resulting in a rout of the Europeans under heavy flaming catapult fire. The results were better only to the extent that the European army wasn't completely destroyed, but even the lower estimates for losses put them at 60,000 dead, so didn't go well for them. So what saved Europe from the Mongol hordes then? Well, that was pure luck. That same year, Ogadai Khan died and the armies retreated to mourn his passing before they could fully take advantage of their victories. Ogadai Khan was recorded as being a particularly intelligent and lenient Khan, but as far as European history is concerned, by far the most significant aspect of his personality was how his great love of wine put him in an early grave. Lucky Europe. Number 7. Engineering marvels. Although the Mongols owed the majority of their astoundingly fast imperial expansion to their exemplary horse archers, Genghis Khan's nomadic upbringing had taught him to appreciate the benefits of alliances and arrangements with outsiders who possessed special goods and/or skills. So, in 1214, 8 years after Genghis Khan had taken control of the Mongols had created a corps of engineers to break into enemy cities, a group which began with 500 soldiers and grew into basically a bunch of miracle workers. For example, at the Amu Darya River, the engineers under Master Zhang were able to whip up a bridge in record time by lashing together 100 ships. For the sack of Baghdad mentioned in entry 10 that we just did a minute ago, the engineers redirected the Euphrates River so that the waters flooded their enemies and disrupted their defenses. Mongol trebuchets would fire so many missiles at encampments that they often depleted the number of large rocks that were available, and other boulders had to be hauled across the empire just to feed the trebuchets. With such a heavy workload, the Mongols sensibly adopted a policy of sparing any engineer when they sacked a city. So, I definitely know what I would be studying. Number 6. Mongols as attempted peacemakers. Even knowing that the Mongols had a sophisticated military machine and tactics, the main impression we have of them is as a bunch of bloodthirsty warmongers. The relationship with Khwarezmia is all the more surprising then, because Genghis Khan reached out to them only as a potential trade partner. Even Persian historian Juzjani agreed that was the nature of the arrangement, and as we'll see, he would have good reason to portray the Mongols in a negative light. It went south in 1219 when a caravan of Mongols was massacred in the city of Ortar. But the Mongols still did not rush into war. When Khan sent diplomats to demand something be done about this, Shah Muhammad responded by sending back the corpses of Khan's messengers. This was probably an error because Genghis Khan then decided to become the whole flail of God thing for the Islamic nation, and he killed millions of people. Now, just before we get into the next half of today's video, I want to take a moment to tell you about today's sponsor, Crossout. Now, you might not be leading a Mongol horde to conquer Europe, but if you do want to dominate your enemies, you can do it online in the game Crossout. In Crossout, what you do is you get to build your own completely custom vehicle and then pit that vehicle against other people's custom vehicles. Now, Crossout is one of those games where it's like, yeah, by designing your own vehicle, it really means you get to select whether you have like regular or incendiary ammo. And that's kind of it. Oh no, with Crossout, you basically take a main structure, which is basically just kind of a metal frame, and then you attach everything onto it that you want. Like, you will need power, you will need wheels, you will need guns to destroy people. You can also add, what have I done? I've attached, rather than wheels, just like hovering things. So your craft essentially just hovers above the ground, adding rockets, guns, all of that stuff. It's pretty crazy. If you build it well, you are going to dominate. If you build it badly, you are going to get dominated. You can't win them all. It's a super fast-paced game with lots of different game modes, and you've got pretty much limitless freedom to create, and what you do with your vehicle is up to you. Also, major plus is that it's not complicated right from the start. You just jump in, you're like, yeah, it goes like this, and then you go fight. You might get destroyed a little, but you will learn the ropes real quick. Join us on the battlefield for free using the link in the description below. PC, Xbox One, PS4, plus going through that link, you get a free starter set, 3 extra weapons or an extra vehicle cabin, all as just a bonus for registering, and it supports the show, which is great. So click that link below and let's get back to it. Number 5, planting the seeds for the Viet Cong. While for decades the mightiest empires of Asia were unable to stop the Mongols, a modest nation in Southeast Asia was able to stand strong. In 1283, 2 years after the final Mongol attempt to conquer Japan had ended in disaster, Kublai Khan sent a seemingly overwhelming army down into the Red River Valley in what is now Vietnam. The Khan wanted a military victory to save some face. Spoiler alert, didn't work great. Unfortunately for the Mongols, the people of Vietnam had a leader named Tran Hoang Do who was able to rally them to take a stand against the largest empire in the world, which had defeated massive opponents in battle. So what allowed the Vietnamese people to succeed, where so many other nations had failed? Well, they allowed the Mongols to take their capital, but they had been fighting using scorched earth and guerrilla tactics until the Mongol lack of supplies — jungles and mountains are bad for grazing horses — basically forced them to withdraw. More determined than ever to save face, Kublai Khan sent another invasion in 1287. This time the Vietnamese turned to naval cleverness. The Mongols sent their navy to the Bac Dang River, and the Vietnamese were able to lure their ships onto great iron spikes that they had placed beneath the waters. Trang Hoang Do's methods were so successful that for centuries they were the model used by the Vietnamese against invader after invader, most famously by the Viet Cong against the French and American militaries. Number 4, regulatory capitalists. Although the Mongol culture that Genghis Khan took control of was nomadic and its soldiers were willing to show little quarter, they understood the need for trading. They were much more inclined to hunting and horse archery than they were to such labor as fletching, so good relations with merchants were key even when the Mongols were just another isolated community on the steppes. The Khans made sure that they remained vitally important even after their empire reached its zenith. The Chinese and Persian empires had not been nearly so respectful of merchants and taxed them heavily. Under the Mongols, taxes were lifted on merchants and Mongol troops were devoted to protecting them. As a result, the Mongol Empire was flooded with merchants aided in their travels by the elaborate road system that the Mongols built, most famously the Silk Road. Merchants were even allowed to use governmental postal relay stations. This was eventually taken away because the privilege was being abused though. Even empires that are willing to destroy cities with millions of people in them will only put up with so much uncouth behavior. Number 3, the Christian challenge. When Genghis Khan said that he represented the eternal blue sky, he was not idly boasting. The Mongol conquests were to a significant degree a religious crusade, so it's especially surprising that in the wake of their stunning success, which you'd imagine would be extremely validating to their religious doctrine, the Mongols largely turned to other belief systems. Kublai Khan, for one, turned to Buddhism in 1242, but Kublai seemingly wasn't even particularly adherent to that religion and presented a truly stupefying religious offer after he had taken the throne. In 1266, 9 years before the famous arrival of Marco Polo, Kublai had a message sent to the Pope. If 100 clergymen, or men skilled in your religion, as he put it, were sent to his royal palace, and if they convinced him, he would have himself, his court, and all his subjects baptized. There will be more Christians here than there are in your parts, as he put it, and, well, he was probably right. Almost as surprising as the Khan's staggeringly generous offer was the Pope's half-hearted answer. Accounts vary on just how many clergymen were sent. Some say 2, while others go as high as, well, still just 7. By all accounts, it was well under the requested 100, but even if it had been 1,000, the opportunity slipped through the church's fingers because they arrived too late for the Khan to receive them. To be fair, considering that the Mongols had destroyed European armies just 2 decades earlier, it would be understandable for the Pope to be just a touch skeptical. Number 2, strong social welfare programs. You'd think, since they emerged from a nomadic lifestyle fraught with hardship and violence, the Mongols would be harsh and austere with their subjects. That certainly wasn't the case for Kublai Khan. There were programs for even the poorest of the Mongol Empire. Kublai Khan greatly expanded the empire's crop yields by creating an office for stimulation of agriculture. To prepare for inevitably bad harvests, he had immense granary systems built, including 58 in the capital city of Beijing. He was not stingy with the reserve grain either. According to Marco Polo, everyday meals were provided for roughly 30,000 impoverished people in Beijing. Whether it was out of genuine compassion for the people or to maintain order, the effect was the same. People got to eat. Number 1, hyperinflation. We don't want to give the impression that Kublai Khan's time as emperor was a complete domestic success. Even with such issues as enemies across continents and ambitious rivals for the throne that were willing to plunge the empire into civil war time and time again, historians maintain that what brought down the empire was a venture that was relatively harmless on paper. In fact, it was something that quite literally was on paper. So paper money was by no means invented by the Mongols, and in fact the Song region of China had introduced it 9 years before the Mongols conquered them. Still, they brought it back and spread it across the empire, calling it Chao in China and Zhao in Persia. The Mongols made the classic mistake of not backing their printed money with any supply of precious metals or any other commodity, and thus, as the cost of failed wars mounted, they just tried printing more and more money. The burden of currency that became effectively worthless was too much to bear for their peasants, and the seeds of revolution were sown. Even the cleverest, most accomplished warrior nation was no match for hyperinflation. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, smash that like button and definitely check out today's sponsor, Crossout, who I'm linking to below, and thank you for watching.